It's pretty amazing, isn't it? I know most of you are stunned into silence. You can't believe it. I know that's it. But folks, we made a turn just back there. Now, we turned onto the last quarter mile of the Boston Marathon. Now, the Boston Marathon is the oldest annual marathon in the United States, and it has been held every year since 1897. You see, only 15 guys ran the original marathon. Women were actually not allowed to participate in an official capacity until 1972, believe it or not. But plenty of women participated in an unofficial capacity long before that. Now, it begins 26.2 miles to the west of Boston in the town of Hopkinton, Massachusetts. That is where the start line is. And it ends a little bit further up the street here. There's a big yellow line that crosses the street, and it says finish on it in bright blue letters. We're going to go over that in a couple of minutes, but you know what, folks? People like to quack at us from the streets, and I'm kind of amazed the construction workers back there didn't quack at us, because they always do that before I even tell people about quacking, and it ruins everything for me. But people do like to quack at us from the streets, and I like to quack back, and I also like to be the instigator and randomly quack at people for no other reason other than the fact that it's really fun. But here's the thing. If you want to quack, and I hope you do, you just got to do it on my signal. We have to do it as a group, folks. And as the Beatles said, all together now. So when you hear me sing, "You're on the air," I want you all to give me 2 big hearty quacks. And I'm serious. I don't mean like 1 or 2 people doing it so loud my ears bleed and then everyone else kind of smiling at me, because that's really weird when that happens. But let's do it right now. You ready? It's always good to have targets. There are plenty of people on the sidewalks over here. You're on the air! Wow. Oh, man, that's better than I expected. Way better. That's excellent. Thank you very much, folks. But you know what? The Boston Marathon is actually, it's held on Patriots Day, April 19th. Now, that's a state holiday in Massachusetts because, well, I mean, the events leading up to and the events beginning the American Revolution began right around here in the Boston area, eastern Massachusetts. Now, there is one other state in the Union, other than Massachusetts, that celebrates Patriots Day the way we do. And that is, well, it's a New England state. Does anyone know what that state is? It's not New Hampshire. It's not Rhode Island. It's not Connecticut. It's not Vermont. Yes, it's Maine. How did you guess? Yeah. But folks, Maine. You know why? Because during colonial times, Maine was part of Massachusetts. It was just kind of the northern part of Massachusetts. You know what? What do I know? I mean, a lot of times I have marathoners riding my tour. I'll say about 30 miles, and they'll correct me right away. They'll go, 26.2. And, well, I mean, what do I know? I mean, I could run the width of the marathon easily. I mean, actually not easily. I'd probably still be winded by the time I got across the street from the sunless Irish pub to the Dunkin Donuts, and I'd go inside the Dunkin Donuts and go, yeah, can I get a large iced coffee, extra cream, extra sugar, two Boston cream donuts. But folks, here's the finish line right up here. We're going to go over that in just a sec. And as we go over this, you should know that that is as close as Dr. Fabulous will ever come to actually crossing this finish line. Unless he makes some drastic changes in his life. Maybe beginning with not referring to himself in the third person all the time. So, in this area in particular, you're going to hear the name Copley all over the place. You might be wondering what that's all about. There's the Copley Place Mall, the Copley Square Hotel, the Copley Marriott, the Copley Westin. Well, it's all named for a portrait artist whose statue is over to the right, John Singleton Copley. And he's holding a color palette. Now that is based on his self-portrait. He painted the portraits most notably of people like Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Paul Revere. And that is based on his self-portrait. And actually, the portrait of Paul Revere, I always thought it funny. I don't know if you know the one I'm talking about. He's holding a pewter mug, and he looks suspiciously like Jack Black for some reason. But that's based on his self-portrait, as I call it, an 18th century selfie. Rumor has it he also liked to randomly paint pictures of his dinner and send it to his friends. Now, folks, the Trinity Church is over here, considered to be among the 10 most architecturally important buildings in the United States. Now, I'll talk more about that on our way back through here, because we're going to come back through here later on. We have a lot of churches in Boston. But, folks, by a show of hands, how many of you have been to or planning to go to, or at the very least heard of Boston's Museum of Science? Raise your hands if you've heard. Okay, so their original location was once right over here in this building. You see that brick and brownstone building over there, today home to an expensive furniture and fitting store called Restoration Hardware. Now, that's where Boston's Museum of Natural History was founded in 1862 by a group of people who are trying to promote the teaching of the sciences in schools, and this is where they were until the 1940s. And their collection had just grown so large, they were looking for a new spot. So what they did was they took out a 99-year lease on top of the old Charles River Dam at $1 a year. 99 bucks, not bad. They moved over there, and in 1951 they opened under their new name, Boston's Museum of Science, where it's fun to find out. And I'll show you all where that is in just a little while, because we're going to go right past it. But there is another church coming up, and in the windows is one of the largest collections of original Tiffany stained glass in the entire world, designed by Louis Comfort Tiffany's own hand, the man who founded the jewelry company Tiffany's. Now, it's right over here. It's kind of a plain-looking church. On the outside, anyway, this is the Arlington Street Church, a Universalist Unitarian church. Now, if you, you can actually go in there for tours. They're open for tours today from, 10 a.m. through 3 p.m. if you want to see it from the inside. Trust me, it's much more beautiful on the inside. But there are 2 windows up there that have plain glass in them. And the reason for that is, the Great Depression hit in 1929 and the church ran out of money. Now, they had planned to have stained glass designed by Mr. Tiffany's own hand in every single one of these windows, but, they ran out of money when the Great Depression hit, and by the time the Great Depression was all over, he had died. So they only wanted it designed by his own hand, so they just left plain glass and 2 windows. By the way, this was one of the first buildings built here in the Back Bay, and I'll tell you more about that on our way back through here later, but 60 to 65% of Boston's modern-day landmass is reclaimed land, landfill. So we have a lot of parks in Boston, and one of them is, Boston Public Garden over here. Now, Boston Public Garden, we're going to go right past it, and you're going to see inside Boston Public Garden, there's some little paddle boats in there. Now, the passengers, they sit on benches in the front. The driver sits inside the big swan in the back and paddles the boat. Those have been running every spring and summer since 1877 by the same family, the Paget family. And they were founded by Robert Paget in 1877, who was inspired by his favorite opera, in which the hero of the story gets pulled miraculously across a lake in a boat that's pulled by a giant swan so he can rescue his beloved. Now, they're actually going to be closing in a couple of weeks because, they're open from really April through September. They close after Labor Day, but every spring and summer since 1877 by the Paget family. Now, trees, plants, and bushes grow from all over the world inside here, and flowers as well. This is Boston Public Garden, the oldest public botanical garden in the United States, and it's really pretty much why my throat closes up every time I come near here. But there's another park entirely. It's 200 years older, 200 years older. You got Boston Common over here to our right-hand side. 1634, Boston Public Garden, 1837. But Boston Common, this was the very first, it's the oldest public park in the United States, and I say that in a very liberal sense. It's not like the Puritans, the original English settlers, wanted to play touch football or frisbee or anything over here. They had set it up for really practical purposes, like grazing their animals. People brought their sheep and cows into town to graze, and they trained militia over here. They had public open-air prayer services in the summertime when their Puritan meeting houses were too hot and stuffy. Also, public executions and public punishments happened over here. And I'm going to tell you a little bit later on what a fun bunch of people the Puritans actually were. Now, folks, believe it or not, the shoreline was once right over here. That's where the waves once broke during high tide. And the night before the American Revolution began, on April 18th, 1775, 700 British troops boarded their longboats right here to cross the Charles River to land over in Cambridge at Lechmere Point across the harbor, and then they marched inland 14 miles to the towns of Concord and Lexington. The following morning, that's where the first shots of the American Revolution were fired. But that goes into the whole landfill thing I'd tell you about later on. But right now, we're heading up Beacon Hill. It's a very exclusive but historic part of Boston, and it's also a strict no quacking zone. We are not allowed to quack up here no matter what happens. If we have a little kid quacking their head off at us at a stoplight, we cannot quack back. The reason is, wealthy people have delicate ears. We need to preserve their hearing. But it is a very exclusive but historic part of Boston. Many of Boston's oldest, most prominent families, the old, wealthy Yankee families, sometimes referred to locally as Boston Brahmins. They still live up here. You can identify them by their jaws. Their jaws sticks out of the bottom, and they all sort of talk like that. But look at the numbers on the houses to our left-hand side. Because, well, they all run in descending consecutive order as we go up the hill. No houses can ever be built over here to our right. That's Boston Common. Public lands in 1634, and hey, that's the frog pond down there with the little kids running through the fountain. That's really what it's used for. In the summertime, little kids come to cool off there, and in the wintertime, we have an ice skating rink down there, usually from November through March. It was built in 1848. So we're coming up to the top of Beacon Hill, ladies and gentlemen. Look to our left-hand side here. You're going to see the Massachusetts State House. It's where all the laws are made for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where the state Senate and House of Representatives meet. And the brick building in the middle with the gold dome on top of it is the original building, completed in 1798. Several statues on the front lawn. The General Hooker entrance to our left, just to clear this up, is referring to General Joseph Hooker on his horse, in case there's any confusion there. But Mary Dyer is sitting over there, looking wicked sad, and it says Quaker and Witness for Religious Freedom underneath the name. Now, Mary Dyer, folks, she was hanged on Boston Common by the Puritans, executed for preaching Quakerism in Boston. You have to understand, the Puritans came here for religious freedom, but it's really something they didn't offer to anyone outside their own belief system. Over to our right, folks, is 122 Bowdoin Street. The third-floor apartment belonged to John F. Kennedy. And from the time he was a junior politician right here in Massachusetts, all the way up to the end of his life as President of the United States, that was his official residence and voting address. I can see in your faces, folks, you're going, come on, Dog Fab. This tour is really starting to go downhill. Yeah. Glad you guys like puns. Yeah. Otherwise, it would be punishment, wouldn't it? Yeah. Okay, 86 the puns. Okay. But you may have noticed, I can't imagine how you wouldn't, the disproportionate number of Dunkin Donuts here in Boston. Yeah, everyone notices that, especially if they're not from around here. It's just normal to us around here. We're like, what, you don't got Dunkin Donuts everywhere where you are from? What's wrong with you? Well, there's one on the corner here, like there are on many corners here in Boston. As a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, this tour was brought to you in part by Dunkin Donuts. Because every day, when Dr. Fabulous travels into Boston to his fabulous job, he stops off for a nice large Dunkin Donuts iced coffee. Made the Boston way, of course. Lots of cream, lots of sugar. And around here, we call that a regular. And I personally think it is the best coffee-flavored cream and sugar around. Now, the reason we have so many of them, folks, is the world headquarters of Dunkin' Brands is less than 15 miles away. Out in the town of Canton, Massachusetts, the very first Dunkin' Donuts opened in 1950, 8 miles south of Boston in Quincy, Massachusetts. So by default, we have a lot of them. In downtown Boston alone, the last time I checked, it was like 111 of them altogether. Oh, there's a church coming up. Another church. It'll be to our left-hand side in just a second, but it's called the Old West Church. It's an old brick church building, completed in 1806. Now, the only time this was not a church throughout its history was when it was a branch of the Boston Public Library in the 1960s. On election days, there was a polling station in the basement. That is where John F. Kennedy cast his vote, presumably for himself, in the 1960 election for President of the United States. It is a wild guess, but I'm just assuming that he didn't vote for Richard Nixon. John gentlemen, you won't have Nixon to kick around anymore. Folks, you're looking at a former politics student. Why do you think I'm doing this for a living? Yeah, poli-sci, be a tour guide. Now, folks, a lot of movies have been filmed in Boston over the past 20 years or so. It kind of started with Good Will Hunting and kind of went on from there. And each one of them sort of, involves either Matt Damon or Ben Affleck or some combination of the two, with the occasional Wahlberg thrown in for good measure. Now, one of those films was The Departed. Anyone here ever seen The Departed? Raise your hands. All right. So if you've seen The Departed, you might recognize that building over there. That was used as the Massachusetts State Police headquarters in The Departed. Now, it's actually called the Hurley State Services Building, the Charles F. Hurley Building, or just the Hurley Building. Now, the partner's bus is blocking the view of it now, but there's a bizarre-looking stairway over there some of you might have seen. There are actually a couple of scenes where Leonardo DiCaprio uses those weird steps. It's a scene where he's arguing with his therapist/girlfriend on the front steps there. Now, folks, most of these buildings around here, especially this one, I mean, obviously this one dates to the 1960s. Built in a 1960s style of architecture known as brutalism. Now, they date to the 1960s around here because they were all built as part of the same project known as urban renewal, which is kind of a nice-sounding name for something sort of tragic that happened in this area that erased a whole part of Boston's history and an entire neighborhood. Now, the old West End of Boston, look over here to our left, you're going to see the museum dedicated to its memory. If you want to get a sense of what the old West End actually looked like, there's a building in front of us with the Mac ad on it, right up here. This is an original tenement building. Look at it as we go past. You had individual families living on each floor. And the people who lived here, they called it the greatest neighborhood this side of heaven, which is actually written right over there. I'll tell you more about that on our way back through here later. But ladies and gentlemen, if you look over to the right-hand side, you'll see a bridge. This bridge has a name, and it's called the Leonard P. Zakum Bunker Hill Memorial Bridge. Alright, well, that didn't really have the thunder I thought it would. We don't bother with all that. Anyway, either around here we call it the Bunker Hill Bridge or the Zakum Bridge, depending on who you are. It's one of the widest cable-stayed bridges in the entire world. It was the widest in the entire world when first it was completed back in 2002 as part of the Central Artery Tunnel Project. But since then, folks, a slightly wider cable-stayed bridge has been built in Vancouver, British Columbia. They put in a bike lane. Whoop-de-doo, who cares? But the cable stays were designed to resemble the rigging on a sailing ship to kind of remind people of Boston's very strong maritime history. And then the central pillars were designed to resemble the Bunker Hill Monument, which I'll tell you more about on our way back through here. And folks, I keep saying that because, you know what, I wouldn't be able to fit in all the stuff in one trip through, and even if I tried doing that, I'd have nothing to talk about on the way back through here, so it'd be really awkward and sweaty and uncomfortable for me. I'd just be like, so, how are you guys? How you doing? Good. Did you take a plane here? Yeah, planes are kind of cool. You know, they go up in the air and stuff. Yeah. But folks, what we're going to do is we're going to go past the, Boston's Museum of Science in just a minute, where it's fun to find out. Now, Boston's Museum of Science, ladies and gentlemen, originally known as Boston's Museum of Natural History when it was founded in 1862, moved over there in 1951. And what you can do, folks, you can go to the Mooger Omni IMAX Theater, several different shows that play there. It's like a 180-degree screen that kind of wraps around you. But you'll see very clearly they've immortalized my mother-in-law right over there, out in front of the Charles Hayden Planetarium. Now, the Charles Hayden Planetarium, if you want to get a great show about all the moons in our solar system orbiting all the different planets, that's where you'd want to go. You can also see the dark side of the moon, because it's where they play Laser Pink Floyd as well. And also, there are several live presentations like the Electrical Show, folks. Or as we always called it, the Lightning Show. And that happens underneath the White Dome over there. Now, that is where I learned. It's where they show you all about how electricity works and how currents flow and all that stuff. It's where I learned at the age of 9. When I was, of course, much less fabulous than I am today. When you're stuck in your car during a thunder and lightning storm, what protects you from the lightning is not the rubber on the tires. Now, folks, the rubber on the tires, everyone says that. That is the #1 myth about why it's safe to be in your car during a thunder and lightning storm. It's the metal frame of the car that protects you. It's actually what's known as a Faraday cage. The name of the protective cage the person operating the electrical show is inside of. And don't ask me why I'm so obsessed with that one factoid, but I am, so there. You know, we're going to turn onto Museum Way here, folks, which is a little weird because the museum's back there. But from Museum Way, we're going to turn on to Education Street up here, which does make sense because, well, EF, Education First, is up here. Now, part of EF is what's known as the Halter International Business School. And out in front of it, to our left, we're going to kind of slow down just a little bit. We're going to see a big slab of the Berlin Wall over here with its original graffiti on it. That was a gift to Bertel Halt, the founder of EF, for his 50th birthday, from all the employees of EF, and at the time their motto was breaking down barriers through education. Now they specialize in language immersion programs of all different kinds, international educational exchange programs, and travel programs. And that's EF1, the business school, because it was built first, but EF2 is over here. That's their main building. They're building EF3 and 4. EF3 and EF4 in the distance. Their North American headquarters right here. If you look over to the right, you'll catch a glimpse of the skateboarders' natural environment. This is the Lynch family skate park, ladies and gentlemen. It's barely 3 years old, and it already looks a whole lot older, but this was actually the result of nearly 3 decades of arguments, proposals, counter-proposals, and delays to finally have a public skate park built in the Boston area. Now, folks, we're going to go in the water, and our ramp is right up here. Above your heads, folks, you have life jackets, and for those of you under 90 pounds, your life jackets are over here to our right-hand side. For those of you over 90 pounds, your life jackets are over here to our left-hand side, and well, I guess if you're exactly 90 pounds, you're out of luck. That was a joke, folks. But, folks, there is a life ring above Jay's head. There's another life ring all the way in the back. There's a fully stocked first aid kit under the jump seat here. One of 2 handheld fire extinguishers. One here, another in the back. So, folks, we're going to go in the water. Yes, there it is right there. But, folks, yeah, we're going to go in the water. And, Jay is, what he's doing is engaging the propeller, putting us in drive 1, and one big blast in the horn as we go in. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, this truck is now a duck. And you know what, folks? I realized something. We haven't quacked in a while. Let's have 2 big quacks for no reason at all. You're on the air! Excellent, all right. But this is the Charles River, ladies and gentlemen. The Charles River was named by the very first Englishman to chart this area back in 1614. A guy by the name of Captain John Smith. You may have heard his name in connection with Pocahontas. Now, he was an English explorer and adventurer, and the first Englishman to chart this particular area, and he called it New England. And he wrote that on his map, and he brought us a brand new map of New England back to the King of England, James I. James had a 15-year-old son by the name of Charles, and Charles was heir to the throne. He put the map in front of young Charles, and he said, "Charlie, buddy, pick out anything you want that's on that map, Chuck. And name it for yourself, would you bet?" And Chuckles looked at the map, and he saw this big squiggly line that said Massachusetts along it. And he said, "That is now the Charles River." And so it is today. And folks, you know what? There really is no evidence at all he sounded anything like Cat Stevens, but that's kind of how I do it. folks, in front of us is the Charles River Dam, completed in 1908, built to separate the ocean and the Charles River for the very first time. Now, what they needed to do was, well, they wanted to be able to bring back boats and barges all the time upriver. But before this was built, when the depth of the river was dependent on the tide, it was too shallow at low tide to bring boats and barges upriver to service the industry. So in order to be able to do that, they had to build a dam separating the river from the ocean. And that's what they did. In 1908, they built this dam. They filled up the area behind the dam, creating a huge basin. So it was always deep enough for boats and barges to go through. Then you have a lock for those boats and barges to travel in and out of the basin. This is the Charles River Dam lock, folks. This is the dam wall over here. The dam bridge is up there. There's the dam tower. Any other dam questions? All right, so in the old days, you would have seen a giant steel door at the end of the lock, already closed. Now on this end, there is another giant steel door. And today it stays permanently inside the wall over to our front left-hand side. But in the old days, that would have slid shut behind us after we came through, gone into a niche in the wall over here to the front right. And while we waited inside here, they would have equalized the water level, matching it with the water on the other side in the basin. And then when they were done doing that, they would have slid open the giant door at the end, and then we would have been able to go right through. But folks, it's no longer a functioning lock, because in 1978, it was replaced entirely by a different dam and lock system altogether. The Gridley locks. Those are about a quarter-mile off behind us. They are what separate the ocean and the Charles River today, so that's why this stays open permanently. Now, there are, folks, some very important rules you have to follow in the upper basin, okay? It is my job to point these rules out to you. Fortunately, though, they've been provided for your convenience. There is a green board at the very end of the lock to the front left-hand side over there, just beyond that building, where it says very clearly, efuuka. And number 3 is the most important. Make sure you read that carefully. You're on the air! All right, you got the rules right there. Good. All right, so number 3 is the most important. But on either side of us, we have 2 totally separate cities in 2 totally different counties. Now, first of all, over here to our left-hand side in Suffolk County is the city of Boston. Then across the river to the right-hand side in Middlesex County is the city of Cambridge. But both cities were founded the exact same year by the same people, the Puritans, 1630. Now, in the early days, see, the Puritans were very worried about an attack coming from the ocean. You see, they knew that not a whole lot of people liked them very much. The King of England absolutely could not stand the Puritans, which is why they came here. They were a bunch of religious fanatics. And their views were far too extreme for the established church in England, so they wanted to live their own way of life, but they knew they were outnumbered in the New World by people who hated them even more. The Catholic powers of Spain and France, who might send a fleet of ships to annihilate this tiny colony full of English heretics. So what they decided to do was, for the first 8 years, instead of having their seat of government in Boston, they decided to have, well, instead of having it exposed to the ocean, they had it tucked away about a mile further up the Charles River, at a little settlement then known as Newtown. In 1636, they opened a center for higher learning in Newtown, and they called it the College. Because let's face it, folks, the Puritans were very inventive and daring with their names, wouldn't you say? Yeah, well, 2 years later in 1638, there was a young and wealthy Charlestown minister by the name of John Harvard who died. Now, in his will, John Harvard left half of his fortune, about 778 English pounds. A lot of money in those days. And his entire 400-volume library of books, he left that to the college as well. So they renamed it in his honor, Harvard College. But today, as we'd all say around here, Harvard University. And it was also in 1638 that the seat of government for the colony was moved over to Boston. I guess they thought it was safe enough. Newtown was given a new name. They renamed it Cambridge because most of the founding Puritans, they had been educated at Cambridge University in England, which they saw as being the seat of all learning, as do most Cambridge graduates to this very day, folks. So, folks, the Charles River here, it's 80 miles long. Its source is Echo Lake in the town of Hopkinton, Massachusetts. Anybody know of something else that also begins in the town of Hopkinton, Massachusetts and ends in Boston, happens every year in April since 1897 and involves a lot of running? Yes, the Boston Marathon was the running that gave that away. It usually is, yeah. But wait a minute. That's 26.2 miles long. So, how did two things begin and end in the same place? One be 80 miles, the other 26.2. Well, pretty simple, really. You see, the Charles River is not a straight shot. It meanders all over the place before it finally makes its way here. But that does afford me the rare and wonderful opportunity to use the word meander, which I don't get to use as often as I'd like to in my daily speech. I really like that word, and I want to use it more often. Now, folks, you may be wondering, some of you anyway, about my accent, or should I say lack thereof. And if you're not aware of this, people from eastern Massachusetts and the Boston area, we tend to have a very distinct accent around here. Well, the truth of the matter is I did grow up around here. It's just that when I was in college, especially, I did a lot of radio. And when one does radio in college, at one point or another, you gotta have that formal radio voice training. So that's what gave me that smooth, velvety voice you're all enjoying so much right now. But it really all depends on who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to my father, for example, I start talking like that, kind of fall back into it. People find it a lot harder to understand me if I'm talking to them like this all the time, unless they're from around here, so we tend to mumble. But folks, you see the bridge that's up here in front of us? This is the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow Bridge, or just the Longfellow Bridge. But the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow Bridge was completed in 1908. And, well, they built it to actually replace the older bridge that once stood in this very spot, the Old West Bridge. Now, the West Bridge, that stood here from actually stood here from the old, the 1700s all the way up to the early 1900s. Now, they decided to replace it because it was getting kind of rickety. Now, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote the poem about Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. Come listen, my children, and you shall hear the midnight ride of Paul Revere. But he also wrote a kind of a dark and dreary poem about the original bridge that once stood in that very spot, the Old West Bridge. Now, when they replaced the West Bridge in 1907, they decided to call the new bridge the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow Bridge, which you can see right now, actually. You see the cranes and the barges and stuff like that. Well, this is undergoing a pretty extensive restoration project. Right now, we are about 5 years into a 3-year project to restore this bridge. That's just kind of the way things happen around here, folks. Don't ask me why. Oh yeah, it'll take 3 years. But folks, what they did first was on the other side. They removed the entire roadbed. They ripped up the entire thing, replaced everything, even the old iron girders and all that stuff that were all rusted out. Then they moved all the traffic over there. They started the same process on this side. And while they were doing that, they removed all 4 of the stone towers, cleaned and repaired the stones, and then reassembled the towers. Those are what gave the bridge its nickname. Often it gets called the Salt and Pepper Bridge, because they sort of look like old-fashioned salt and pepper shakers. That's what my father calls it, the Salt and Pepper Bridge. Sometimes I wonder if he knows what it's actually called. I'd be like, Dad, we're going to take the Longfellow Bridge. He goes, oh, you mean the Salt and Pepper Bridge? No, Dad, the Longfellow Bridge. Yeah, the Salt and Pepper Bridge. I just don't even engage anymore. So, folks, as we break on through to the other side, you're going to get a pretty nice view of Boston's skyline up here. And you won't see anywhere else quite like this, so count yourselves lucky. Now, there is a building in front of us. It's going to be gradually moving over to our right-hand side because we're going to make this broad sweeping turn to the port, but that is the Prudential Tower. True, sort of looks like an enormous cheese grater over there. Now, the Prudential Tower was Boston's first true modern skyscraper, completed in 1965. There's a radio tower at the top of it. A lot of radio stations broadcast from up there. One of them is a classic rock station called WCLX, so you'll hear things like 20,000 watts from the top of the Pru, WCLX. And you get this other building with a big black stripe running down the side of it. The tallest building not only in Boston, but all of New England. 10,344 panes of glass on the John Hancock Tower. Now, many of those, while it was under construction in the mid-1970s, began to pop out of their frames and fall to the ground. Something like 60 fell out altogether. A lot of them, it turned out, had been improperly epoxied into their frames. So while they fixed it, a good portion of the building was covered in sheets of plywood for about a year and a half. And it gained the nickname the Plywood Palace. It was actually featured in the cover of Life magazine, an issue for 1976. Now, normally, and I'm kind of glad actually, normally we'd be trying to avoid lots of sailboats out here. I mean, nothing against the sailboats. I mean, they're all part of community boating, but community boating is based right over here. Now, they were the very first public boating program of their kind in the United States, established in 1942. Originally, it was to give the local kids of Boston something to do in the summertime. Why not teach them how to sail, keep them out of trouble? They've always been based on someone's ability to pay, so there are still kids who pay the old token amount of just $1 to boat here for the entire season. So that means, while they're a non-profit organization, they don't make a lot of money. So when you were buying your Boston Duck Tours tickets, folks, if any of you decided to round up to the nearest dollar on your ticket, it goes to a little charity known as Quack Quack Give Back. And at the end of the year, this is just one of the organizations that we give to with Quack Quack Give Back. So, folks, you may have noticed by now that I absolutely love irony in all of its forms. Well, folks, there is a great bit of irony that's going to be coming up on the other side of the bridge, to the right-hand side. And I want to show this to you. Now, if you look through the trees across Storrow Drive to the right, once we get to the other side, you're going to see an old gray granite building. It's got a cupola on top of it, a round window on one side, chimneys and ventilation shafts, and things like that. Now, it was once known as the old Charles Street Jail. And that was an active jail from 1851 all the way up until about 1990, when it finally closed as a jail. It had been deemed unfit for human habitation. And it was so unfit for human habitation that 11 years ago it reopened as a 5-star hotel called the Liberty Hotel. And honestly, folks, if you can think of a more ironic name for a former jail, I'm all ears, the Liberty Hotel. And their slogan is Be Captivating. The drunk tank where they used to stick people through the night to sober up is a bar called the Alibi. If you enjoy irony as much as I do, it's like a triple-decker irony sandwich. So, folks, what would you say about the water here in the Charles River? What do you think overall? Clean or dirty? You can shout it up to me if you want to. Dirty? Okay, well, that sounds unanimous, actually. What if I were to say that this is actually the cleanest urban river in the United States? And, I mean, a lot of people don't believe me, but it's got a water cleanliness rating of A- to B+. And that's really depending on the time of year. I mean, there is algae in the water, folks. And that's what gives it this sort of greenish-brown color. Well, the brown color comes a lot from tannic acid, from vegetation and things that fall into the river. But, folks, overall, it's a very healthy ecosystem. But up until pretty recently, people used to dump their garbage right into this river, thinking the tide or current would carry it out to sea. Sewage from several communities along the river made its way untreated into the river. Then you had industrial waste from all the mills and factories along the 80-mile length of the river pouring into the river, especially from over here in East Cambridge. That was a major industrial center up until pretty recently. You had rope and string making, textiles, leather goods, you had meat packing facilities, and there was a paint factory over there too. And the old saying was, you know what color paint they're making by the color of the river. Now, things got so bad by the 1960s, this river was so full of chemicals it was in danger of catching fire. Now, around the same time, there was a song that came out by a band called the Standells called Dirty Water. which was meant to be a biting, sarcastic song about Boston and the Charles River, but somehow it ended up becoming the unofficial anthem of Boston, and you'll actually hear it when the Red Sox win a home game. But it goes... Well, I love that dirty water. Ow, Boston, you're my home. Yeah, down by the river. Anyway, folks, the Standells were from San Diego, California. They were right, talking about the Charles River in the 1960s. Now, things began to change. The 1970s rolled around. People's attitudes toward the environment started changing. A lot of the laws started changing as well. 1972, the Environmental Protection Act was passed by U.S. Congress. Now that, for the first time, created lots of new federal laws regarding pollution and the dumping of waste into waterways, and it established the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to enforce those laws. Lots of authority was given to local organizations like the CRWA, the Charles River Watershed Association, who were given the task of cleaning up the river, which was a huge task. When they tested this water for the first time in 1974, they gave it a D- rating in terms of water cleanliness. That's pretty close to poison, folks. Now, the major strides in water cleanliness that happened between 1995 and 2005. Today, the Charles River is the cleanest urban river in the United States. Water cleanliness rating of around A- to B+, depending on the time of year. Now, it isn't perfect, folks. You will occasionally see things floating in the water that don't belong here, like bottles, bits of plastic, and styrofoam cups and stuff like that. Pretty inevitable in such a populated area, but there is a volunteer group, the Charles River Conservancy, which is actually run by Boston Duck Tours, who come out to clean those things up when they can. Now, the real bellwether overall for how healthy the ecosystem is, the huge numbers of living fish that are in this river, and animals and birds can feed on those fish. Double-crested cormorants, especially, you will see long-necked black birds and dive for the fish, very often in the morning and in the afternoon, especially. But 2 years in a row, harbor seals came upriver in the springtime to feed on the fish. And it was the first time last year and the year before, the first time seals have been seen in this river in 2 centuries. By the way, you can actually go swimming in this river. Before 1995, if you even fell in accidentally, it was probably a very good idea to immediately go over to Massachusetts General Hospital and get yourself a tetanus shot. But, folks, you know what? I don't have segues. I just go from one subject to another, like that. So look above your heads. See all this writing up here on the canopy? Most of these here are signatures from various men and women who have ridden this duck, who have served in different branches of the U.S. Armed Forces, active military, retired military, or veterans. If any of you fit those categories, you're perfectly welcome to sign the canopy at the end of the tour. However, that's really all except for Kilroy was here, which I see in a couple of places here. There's one right here in front, and then there's another one in the back. It says Kilroy was here. Now that is a little something that dates from World War II, like the vessel we're in, folks. You see the DUKW? Originally was developed by General Motors as an amphibious craft for the war effort. Now, U.S. industry was working overtime, producing all manner of things, trying to win the war, tanks, planes, ships, all kinds of stuff. Now, in particular, there's a place called the Four Rivers Shipyard down in Quincy, Massachusetts. They were building warships and troop transport ships for the war effort. Now, there was a guy who worked there. His name was Jimmy Kilroy. And among his duties as a foreman, he counted the rivets, which were driven by the riveters. And those are the guys who built the ships. And they got paid by the number of rivets they drove each day. So at the end of each workday, Jimmy Kilroy would come by, and he'd count the rivets, and he'd mark them off of the piece of chalk that they'd been counted. But here's the thing. The riveters knew someone always double-checked his work before the paychecks went out. So what they began to do was the riveters began to come by a little bit later on and erase a few chalk marks here and there. Because they knew that somebody else would come by later and see unmarked rivets and go, Jimmy forgot these ones, and mark them again. That would count them again, so the riveter would end up getting paid double. for those rivets. So Jimmy Kilroy was nobody's fool. He caught on to this pretty quickly, and this made him hot and mad, as we'd say around here. So what he began to do, you're on the air! He began to pull out a wax pencil, and in big angry letters he'd write, Kilroy was here, just to send them a clear message. Eventually, though, these would get painted over and sent all over the world, wherever the war was fought. Europe to the Pacific to North Africa. Turns out, wax pencil. You can't cover it up that easily with paint. You see, the paint doesn't adhere to the wax and it just bleeds right through. So the result, hundreds and hundreds of ships produced in this one shipyard were sent all over the world with Kilroy was here written all over them, inside and out, in some very weird places in some places. Now, the U.S. troops had no idea what this meant. They got carried to all theaters of battle in these ships, and they'd see this. But they definitely knew that other U.S. troops could recognize it pretty easily. So they began to use it as their own personal calling card. So wherever U.S. troops fought, all over the world, on rocks, on bridges, on buildings, and on trees, they would write, Kilroy was here. As an indication to other U.S. troops passing through the area that it was a safe place to be, that it had already been swept. It was only later, though, somebody else had a guy with a big nose peeking over a wall above it, but we have a duck peeking over a wall because we're Boston duck tourists. But, my favorite use ever of Kilroy was here in popular culture was a 1947 episode of Looney Tunes. And it's one where Bugs Bunny gets shot to the moon by a bunch of scientists. When he gets to the moon, he gets off of the rocket and he goes, "I'll just been the first creature ever to make it to the moon." And then he walks by a rock that says Kilroy was here in giant letters. Worth calling Bugs Bunny, do you read? So what's going to happen is folks are going to come out of the water, and Jay has put us into six-wheel drive because, we need that to be able to come out of the water. It means all six wheels underneath us are spinning right now. So when the front wheels, when they touch the ramp, they're going to start to pull us out of the water. So we're going to come right out of the water. And Jay shuts off the propeller because we don't need that anymore. As we get to the top of the ramp, he puts us back into plain old ordinary drive. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, this duck is now a truck once again. What'd you think of that? All right, okay. But you know what, folks? There's something that really deserves a big round of applause. But it's not the commuter rail. It's something that's just beyond it, and it's Boston Sand and Gravel, which is right over there to our right-hand side. Give it up for Boston Sand and Gravel. Yeah, it's very exciting, I know. But seriously, they actually produced 1/3 of all the concrete that went into the entire Big Dig, the Central Artery Tunnel project. And if you don't know what that is, let me explain. It was a 20-year-long, $22 billion project, and its main aim was to put I-93 in a tunnel underneath Boston to replace the old elevated steel highway, the old Central Artery, which used to cut right through the center of the city, which no matter what time of day you were on, it was always a parking lot. I can personally vouch for that. Now, the Central Artery, that stood there from 1956 up until 2003, when they finally began to demolish it. And that was after the tunnel was completed underneath Boston, the Tip O'Neill Tunnel. But in the place of the elevated steel highway, they built a string of beautiful parks running 2 miles through Boston. That's called the Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy Greenway, named for the mother of President John F. Kennedy, Rose Kennedy. She was born and raised over the North End, which was an Irish neighborhood before it became a later on predominantly Italian neighborhood. But if you were to put together all the concrete that went into the entire Big Dig, you could build a sidewalk from Boston to San Francisco, back and forth 3 times. If you put together all the steel, you could build a 1-inch thick steel ring around the Earth's equator. Why you'd ever want to do either of those things, I have no idea, but apparently you could. You guys are really quiet. You just kind of like looking at me. And you have smiles on your faces, that's good, I like that. So coming up to our left, folks. First of all, through these archways, you're going to be able to see, well, there's EF is over there, the EF building, but once we get beyond that, if you keep looking in the distance, you're going to be able to see a big stone obelisk based on ancient Egyptian obelisks, and it is called the Bunker Hill Monument, which commemorates one of the key battles in the bloodiest battle in the American War for Independence, what is called the Battle of Bunker Hill. See that over there in the distance? Well, you see, the Battle of Bunker Hill, as it's called, didn't happen on Bunker Hill, and the monument isn't located on Bunker Hill. But let me explain. You see, the night before the battle, the colonial forces wanted to fortify one of the hills over there in Charlestown, but they were using a British map which had mislabeled the 2 hills. So all the time thinking they were on Bunker Hill, they were actually on Breed's Hill, the next hill over. But they never changed the name of the battle or the monument. But it happened on June 17th. 1775. Now, the following day, the colonials were about to go up against the most powerful army on Earth, the British Army, which in those days worked very well through nice flat open fields, but not very well at all on hillsides. You see, I don't know, maybe that's where the expression an uphill battle came from, I don't know. But they worked throughout the night, the colonials, to build trenches and fortifications crowning the top of the hill. And they had a couple of watchwords, the colonials, because they were low on ammunition. And those were aim low and aim for the best dressed among them. And that usually turned out to be the British officers, which, well, they could afford to be the best dressed because they were gentlemen. Well, why were they aiming for British officers in particular? Well, it's really because they knew that if they wounded or killed a British officer, that would take 3 men out of the fight. The officer, and then the 2 privates who had to help the officer off the field. They had to break formation. So the British forces began around 3:30 in the afternoon, their slow trudge up the hill. In their nice, neat formations and bright red coats, they made conspicuous targets, and they were driven back twice. On their 3rd charge, they were finally able to take the hill because at that point the colonials had run out of ammunition. But it was a very expensive victory on the side of the British. 25% of all British officers killed in the entire 8-year period. The American Revolution killed in that one battle. Any more victories like this will ruin us, was said 3,000 miles away in British Parliament. So folks, we're coming back into the West End of Boston. Once an old, vibrant, working-class neighborhood, up until the late 1950s, home primarily to immigrants, Eastern European, Jewish, and Italian immigrants. Now, there was nothing wrong with the area. It was a working-class neighborhood sitting on prime downtown Boston real estate. And the city realized, see, there's the museum again, wasn't contributing a whole lot in terms of taxes to the city. The city really wanted to redevelop the area, but they didn't have a good enough excuse. And they also wanted to get the federal dollars to clear slums to be able to do it, to pay for it. Now, this area did not fit the criteria of a slum, so the city decided to make it fit that criteria by holding off on the trash pickup for about a month in the West End. Then they sent in inspectors who found giant piles of trash swarming with rats. Well, one inspector said to another, "I don't know, boy, this place looks wicked bad. Let's declare it a slum. What do you think?" "Oh, yeah, John, that's a good idea." So that's what they did. And they were able to get the federal dollars to redevelop the area. They were also able to take it through eminent domain. They threw thousands of people out of their homes giving them little to no compensation for their loss, promising the people who lived here low-cost housing. That's what they said they were going to build, and saying they could move back when it was all done. But instead what people ended up with were expensive high-rise apartment buildings, government buildings, and parking garages. It is considered to be one of the worst examples of city planning in U.S. history. And folks, why am I blathering so much about something so depressing? I'm blathering about it so much because I am a huge fan of Star Trek. That's why. The little museum back there was established primarily through the efforts of the late Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock, who grew up in the West End of Boston. Now, his mother and father and his grandparents were Jewish immigrants from Ukraine. His father, Max, was a barber. And very often I've wondered if maybe it was Max Nimoy's barbershop where the Spock haircut originated. Maybe that was a standard haircut his dad gave little boys in the West End. They were running around looking like little Vulcans or something. Something to think about. But you know what? Leonard Nimoy, growing up in Boston, he actually learned to sail over at community boating. And later on, he moved away, moved to California, and he bought his own boat. And he named it for his old neighborhood in Boston. He called it the West End. That is a building with lots of satellite dishes on it. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. There are things I don't know. Oh, okay, yeah, Channel 7, that's right. So, folks, coming up to our left is, well, on the corner of Union and Hanover Streets, the Bell and Hand Tavern, the oldest continuously running tavern in the United States. And out in front here, these 6 glass structures, this is the New England Holocaust Memorial. There are 6 of them that represent the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust during World War II. On each one of those are 1 million numbers inscribed into the glass for each victim of the Holocaust. It was dedicated in 1995. Now that block of buildings over there is called the Blackstone Block. It's one of the oldest commercial blocks in Boston. And it's also home to the Union Oyster House, the oldest continuously running restaurant in the United States. That opened in 1826. And then, of course, folks, there's this absolutely beautiful, gorgeous building over here to our right-hand side, and I'm sure you'll all agree. This is Boston City Hall, folks, completed in 1969, and in those days considered to be one of the most innovative new buildings in Boston. 11 years ago, it got voted one of the 10 ugliest buildings in the entire world. So it isn't just me who thinks it's absolutely hideous. The inside, you feel like you're in caves that have been excavated underneath the surface of the moon. It's wonderful. So, folks, look over here. Faneuil Hall, to our front left-hand side. There's a brick Georgian-style building. Right over here, to the left, through the trees. Now, the Georgian style, that's a style that came out of England in the mid-1700s. All the kings of England those days were named George. But it's often referred to locally as the Cradle of Liberty because so many events leading up to the American Revolution and American independence happened right over there. It was a gift from a wealthy merchant to the people of Boston. His name was Peter Faneuil in 1742. There's this idealized statue of Samuel Adams right out front in Sam Adams Park. And leader and founder of the Sons of Liberty. He wasn't nearly that good looking in real life, folks. But the old State House is over here to our front right. Now, the old State House, this was, during colonial times, the seat of British colonial power. Right out in front of it, there is a balcony. That is where royal decrees were read back when we were loyal subjects of the British Crown around here. And it's also where the Declaration of Independence was first read aloud to the people of Boston on July 18th, 1776. Copies were sent out from Philadelphia. It was signed on the 2nd of July, not on the 4th of July. But that is our official Independence Day, the 4th of July. But Boston's copy took a couple of weeks getting here by horse courier, so it was read in the morning of the 18th. Now, some of you might be able to see the 2 symbols of British colonial authority up there, the lion and the unicorn, which, by the way, are both native species to Massachusetts. Now, those aren't the originals, because the originals were actually torn down and burned in a bonfire right in front of the building the same day the Declaration of Independence was read from that front balcony, July 18th, 1776. Now, folks, every 4th of July, Independence Day, we have a similar reading of the Declaration of Independence from that front balcony. But we don't reenact the tearing down and burning of the line in uniform because we get awfully expensive if we did that either over here. I hope you can see it. If my enormous Irish head is in your way, you might be able to see. There we go. All right. But there's a great museum on the inside. If you're interested in going in there, I'd highly recommend it. Now, what do you think of our streets in the older parts of the city? Aren't they great? We're lucky enough to be blessed with our original street pattern, folks, which is really to say no pattern at all. And that's why even a GPS will get utterly lost in downtown Boston. Just recalculates the route over and over and over again, and then loses the signal, and then regains the signal, and recalculates the route endlessly until eventually it starts smoking and bursts into flames. So don't use a GPS. It could be a fire hazard in Boston. Get someone like Jay to do the driving. There are days where I'm afraid he's going to burst into flames. You know what? There's a gold steaming tea kettle over here to our right. Now, that's one of the oldest animated signs in the United States. It's also what's known as a pictogram. Back in the days when many people couldn't read or couldn't read English, they had to know what was sold where. So that's how businesses tried to solve that problem. The Oriental Tea Company, that was the emblem of the Oriental Tea Company, which was in business from the 1870s all the way up through the 1960s, right over there. Now, it's considered to be a historic landmark. It has to stay there, but today, as you can see, it graces the front of a Starbucks. Folks, everything will eventually become a Starbucks, and I've resigned myself to this. You know, people say that death and taxes are the only certainties in life. I say death, taxes, and Starbucks, and if you can't beat them, join them. But you know what, folks? They are heavily outnumbered, Starbucks, in Boston by Dunkin Donuts. Yeah. But there's a Dunkin Donuts actually right around the corner there. And there's another Dunkin Donuts right around this corner. I call that corporate hazing, folks. I'm trying to show them who's boss around here. Yeah. You need a lot of caffeine when you do this job. But look to the left. This is the oldest burying ground in Boston. King's Chapel Burying Ground, 1630. Just as soon as the English began to settle this area, this is where they began to bury their dead, right over here. John Winthrop, the very first Puritan governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colonies, buried over there. Now there's another burying ground I love pointing out because of all the famous people buried over here. The grave of Samuel Adams, leader and founder of the Sons of Liberty, and one of the three signers of the Declaration of Independence buried in here. His grave's over here to our right. Go to the Beantown pub to our left, order yourself a cold Sam Adams at the bar, and you can stare out the window at the original cold Sam Adams. Now, the other two signers of the Declaration of Independence who are buried here, Robert Treat Paine and John Hancock. Paul Revere is buried in here. Peter Faneuil, he's buried in here too. And there's this big stone monument in the middle that is marked Franklin. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the grave of Benjamin Franklin, his mother, father, and older brother. Yeah, Ben Franklin's buried in Philadelphia, folks. But you see, Ben Franklin, well, he lived in Boston. He was born to a prominent Boston family, lived here till around the age of 17. His mother was trying to push him in the direction of becoming a minister. She wanted him to be a good boy and go into the church. Well, neither did he want to be a good boy or go into the church. So when he was 17 years old, he ran away from home. And he ended up in Philadelphia, and that's where he's buried. But Boston Common, once again, folks, is over here to our right-hand side. Now, Boston Common, you know, remember I was saying the Puritans earlier. When they first got here, they tried settling across the harbor in what would eventually become Charlestown. But pretty early, they couldn't find enough fresh water because they wanted to brew beer with it. They didn't want to drink it directly. They wanted to brew beer with it. And you can't brew beer in salty water. It won't work. So they heard there was lots of fresh water at the top of Beacon Hill coming from a natural spring and lots of good land for grazing their animals here. So the original 50 acres, they kept 48 open. Now, the Puritans were a strict religious society, religious fanatics, and they lived under a strict code of laws known as Puritan Blue Laws. And, well, singing was okay as long as you're doing that in prayer. Dancing was strictly forbidden. You guys have seen Footloose, right? If you've seen Footloose, you kind of know what I'm talking about. But I don't think they executed anyone in Footloose for dancing. You could be executed in Puritan society for something like dancing. So that limited their avenues for group entertainment. Just about there are only two forms of group entertainment which happened on Boston Common were public executions and public punishments. Because they were a fun-loving bunch of people, folks. They knew how to throw a party. In love with life, the Puritans were fun for the whole family. Bring the kids and bring the beer. So there are a lot of colleges in Boston. And right around us here, this is Emerson College. You'll see signs, banners that say Emerson College. And across the street to our left is their radio station, WERS, 88.9 on the dial, at 180 Tremont Street, kind of the flagship college radio station for Boston. It's what all the other college radio stations around here kind of aspire to be. People go there to study things like theater, film, acting, directing, especially broadcasting. Jay Leno was a graduate of Emerson College. So was Henry Winkler, Fonzie from Happy Days, who today does reverse mortgage commercials. Now, folks, the last burying ground I'm going to show you is to our right. Central burying ground is where you would have been buried if you had died poor in Boston. From the mid-1700s to the early 1800s, usually in one big hole with a lot of other people. Now, take for example the portrait artist Gilbert Stuart, who painted the portrait of George Washington that is on the U.S. $1 bill. He was buried over there in the 1820s because he died with very few of those George Washingtons in his pocket. And it wasn't until the 1870s that his family raised enough money to put up a monument, and by then they couldn't really remember exactly where he'd been buried. So there is a monument to Gilbert Stuart, a very small one, but it's not necessarily where he's buried. Clearly, his family cared for him very deeply. Now, folks, this probably looks familiar because it is. And we came through here earlier. But you know what? To our left, I want to show you something. It's some little statues to our left-hand side of Mrs. Mallard and her 8 ducklings along a walkway. There's a little break in the trees here. Jack, cack, whack, mack, knack, oack, back, and quack. If I say that any slower, I will mess it up, but Robert McCluskey's children's book, Make Way for Ducklings, part of that story takes place right over there in Boston Public Garden, about Mr. and Mrs. Mallard trying to get their 8 ducklings from the Charles River to the lagoon on Boston Public Garden. Written in the 1940s, actually. The official state children's book for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Anyone who grew up around here had that read to them as little kids. Now, folks, there is a place in Boston, well, where everybody knows your name, apparently. I mean, they didn't know my name when I was there the other night, but the original Cheers bar is right over here to the right-hand side. Now, Cheers, folks. A lot of times you get people coming to Boston whose favorite TV show ever was the 1980s and early 90s sitcom Cheers. And that means very often they know almost everything there is to know about Cheers facts and trivia, except for the fact that the bar downstairs on the interior doesn't look anything like the bar on the TV show. And the reason for that is only the exterior shots of that building were ever used for the TV show. The bar was a Hollywood set, folks, so that caused a lot of problems. So about 11 years ago, a second Cheers bar was built upstairs called the Replica Bar. It is an exact replica of the bar on the Hollywood set. Now remember I said the shoreline was once right along the edge of Boston Common earlier? Well, this is the Back Bay, folks. 60 to 65% of Boston's modern-day landmass is reclaimed land, landfill. So this area, to our right-hand side, for about a square mile, was once an enormous shallow estuary of the Charles River. The tide used to come all the way back here, mixed with the waters of the Charles River. That happened for thousands of years, until they started to fill it in the mid-1800s. Around 1857, they started to bring in millions upon millions of tons of dirt and gravel from a town 10 miles away, using the railroad. Once it got here, most of the work distributing the dirt was done by hand, because there was a huge, cheap labor force perfectly willing to do that work. My ancestors, mostly the Irish. A huge Irish immigrant population. So for 24 hours a day they worked, 6 days a week. They took Sunday off each week. For 50 years, this entire area, 570 acres over a square mile, was all filled in. And you know what, folks? One of those streets that they laid out here in a nice, neat grid pattern is Newbury Street that we're turning on to. If you have lots of money or a huge credit limit to spend at places like Giorgio Armani, Ann Taylor, Burberry, Tiffany, Chanel, Shreve, Crump and Lowe, places like that, it's where you'd want to come to. Now, it's not too bad today, it's a weekday, but on the weekends, folks, we have to do what's known as the Newbury Street Slalom. That is slaloming around all the double-parked Land Rovers, Range Rovers, Mercedes SUVs, and Beamers. You know, on one of those days, you can actually smell the entitlement in the air. Yeah, it's wonderful. Now, there is a church over here to the front right-hand side, excuse me. Over here is the Church of the Covenant. It is built entirely of what's known as Roxbury pudding stone, which is the official state stone of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that's why only Dr. Fabulous can bring you the real Rock of Boston. And I mean literally, the rock, the state stone of Massachusetts. Now, this is one of about 30 churches in Boston built of Roxbury pudding stone, the state stone of Massachusetts. There's only enough stone left in the original quarry to be able to do just repairs to the existing churches. Now, these streets here, folks, alphabetical order, the ones we're crossing. We turned off of Arlington, we went over Berkeley, and Clarendon is the street we're going to turn on to. Arlington, Berkeley, Clarendon, Dartmouth, Exeter, Fairfield, Gloucester, Hereford, Ipswich, Jersey, Kilmarnock. Which is a little different if you're from the Boston area. If you're from around here, it goes Arlington, Berkeley, Clarendon, Dartmouth, Exeter. Sorry, for the most part. Many of those names, not all of them, are the names of cities and counties in England, whose members of Parliament were in favor of granting the colonies their independence during the American Revolution. Folks, I memorized all this stuff, so you don't have to. You can just let it go in one ear and right out the other if you want to. But I'm sure you're memorizing all this stuff, right? Yeah, of course. See, the great thing about Boston, it's not too bad today because it is a Monday, but see, the pedestrians kind of always take their half out of the middle, no matter what. But you know what? Even when they have the cross signal, we have our green light at the same time. So we just have to choose the right moment or rely on the benevolence of the pedestrians to let us go. Sometimes we could spend all day waiting here. The most important instrument in anyone's car in Boston is their horn. It's said that if they removed all the horns from all the cars around here, nobody would know how to drive, because we wouldn't have any way of reminding each other how to drive. There's a little thing I refer to as Boston sonar, and it involves traveling into Boston and waiting at lights. You know you're getting close to Boston, because the time it takes for the light to turn green in front of you and the car behind you to hit the horn gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. Yeah, eventually they hit the horn just as it turns green, in case you forgot what that color meant. Now, over here, to our front right-hand side, is the Trinity Church. Trinity Church, considered to be one of the 10 most architecturally important buildings in the United States, according to the American Association of Architects. It's an Episcopal church completed in 1877, designed by an architect named Henry Hobson Richardson. Richardsonian Romanesque is the style. Now, beautiful stained glass on the inside, beautiful stonework on the outside. But I gotta tell you, folks, the most gorgeous view of anything, anywhere in Boston, bar none, by far, is of course the one I get of myself over here to our left-hand side, reflected in the base of the John Hancock Tower. Man, I look fabulous. Ladies, if you missed it, there I am again. So, folks, Boston Public Library is over across Dartmouth Street here, the oldest free public lending library in the United States. Established in 1848. And, well, that was at a time when there really were no public library. Well, there was one public library in the United States. But you couldn't bring the books home. It wasn't a lending library. So what good is that? But at this library, you've always been able to take up to 75 books home at a time if you want to. It's also got the distinction of being the only public library in the United States that is also a presidential library, because the books and papers of John Adams, second president of the United States, right over there. As an institution, they've been around since 1848, but they've been in that one spot since 1895. Now, folks, I have a little bit of sad news for some of you. Dr. Fabulous is going to be signing off momentarily. It'll be the end of our broadcast day. So it's going to be a teary farewell, actually, for all of us, I think, including myself. But this tour has been brought to you by the Museum of Science, the New England Aquarium, the Charles River Watershed Association, Quack Quack Give Back, and the good people at Photogenics. Now, Some of you might have had your photo snapped before you got on board the Duck. Well, just to let you know, those are available right up here. If you'd like to take away a little memento of your time here in Boston and your fabulous tour with Dr. Fabulous, I want to thank you all very much for riding with us today, me in particular. And wherever you end up, folks, please stay fabulous. Thank you very much, everybody. Now, just remain seated momentarily, because the only realistic way you guys can get off the Duck is if Jay and I come back. We release the ladder and we get off first, because otherwise you'll find yourselves trying to climb out the windows. And don't even try doing that, please. Now also, take a good look around you. Make sure you're bringing everything with you that you brought on board. Your cameras, your bags, your phones, your coats, your kids. Don't make me sell them back to you tomorrow on eBay. And give a big round of applause to Jay, everybody. In many ways, he has the hardest job getting us around the city. And folks, go ahead. If you've got the earphones, the translation earphones, just hold on to those. All right. Follow me, everybody. I'll meet you tomorrow instead.
Thank you. That was so nice.
Thank you.
I just want to know how this thing changes to, like in water. In water.
My folks. All right, thanks very much. You're welcome. Have a good ride. Bye, folks. You're welcome. Thank you very much. Bye. You're welcome. Now you can hold on to those.
What happens? The tires go up or something.
What's that?
When it's in water, what happens to the tires?
I don't need that actually. They hang right down. They don't go up inside or anything. They just hang right down.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ajita Wakanda.